So the LO2 is pretty much focused on artificial intelligence, and what we're going to be looking at is this particular part of emerging technologies, which is becoming critically important. As far as the today's modern world is concerned, we see AI, or artificial intelligence in short, pretty much all around us, and this is going to be quite a bit of let's say eye opener for some of us, because we don't realize sometimes that we are using applications, or softwares, or probably benefits of some of the artificial intelligence which have actually creeped up in our lives through technology. And because we use a lot of devices today, especially devices in the telecom sector, like smartphones, you look at mobile phones, you look at tablets, PCs, we do generally see a glimpse of artificial intelligence, or AI as we call it, in some of these devices that we use quite often during the course of our day. The other bits that we're going to be looking at is also understanding what are the benefits of it, how do we define AI, what are the types, and generally get into understanding this is a topic and how this is going to shape the future of our digital world. Now, the learning outcome has quite a number of assessment criteria. There are about 5 which are predominantly explained. So here we are looking at about a simple coverage on the topic, the definition, and in general, looking at understanding briefly some of the key context and terms that we would use in learning outcome 2. And then the merit and distinction criteria are focused primarily on understanding things related to expansion, with a bit of an example in terms of what are the benefits of AI, where do we see any concerns. There's a lot of hype and negative hype around the use of artificial intelligence, and how it will probably, some people, and let's say some thought processes, that it will be detrimental to humans when we look at the development of AI, because it lacks emotion and things like that. So we will discuss that in terms of how artificial intelligence will be, what are the concerns first, what are the myths, and then obviously look at what are the benefits or disadvantages to the society. So quite a lot to cover in the second learning outcome. Some bits and pieces that we are going to be picking up in the indicative content, which are related to concerns about artificial intelligence, in particular to human rights and privacy, because there's so much data being collected, currently by applications that we use. And let's not forget the episode of, Cambridge Analytica, which as a company was fined quite a lot, and obviously, Facebook took it over, and it played a very crucial role in the last American election. So we'll discuss a couple of things related to that, and then focus on 1 or 2 aspects of it, which I just want to make sure that we understand that when we talk about AI is having, let's say, we find applications and usage of AI across in a lot of different sectors and domains. You can see that in healthcare, education, finance, customer service, manufacturing, production, engineering, lots of other places. But there are obviously certain sectors which are slated to grow more than some of the others, and obviously we will look at closely examining when we talk about the distinction and the merit criteria. It says evaluate the impact of artificial intelligence on personal and business activities in today's society. So we'll be looking at things like big data, we'll be looking at robotics, and we'll also be looking at understanding the Internet of Things, and how this will the development of AI will impact some of these big developments which we get to see, and we as humans, as people, get to benefit from this. Now, in order to discuss this particular, let's say, learning outcome 2, what we are going to do is obviously go through some PowerPoint slides. I've got a couple of videos, in the presentation, which I would want you to go through. Some of them are, a bit longer than others. So I'm going to be looking at selectively discussing and obviously playing some of them as we go across in our session. There's a very interesting video which I was watching, and the reason we started a bit late today, and I said apologies for that, was basically looking at a TED Talk video which is by Max Tegmark, who is somebody who's considered an expert, in the field of artificial intelligence, and he did a video or a TED talk essentially, in 2018, in July of 2018, wherein he talked about how can artificial intelligence empower us, and we should look at that positive context of it rather than looking at that AI will be overpowering, human intelligence and human operations by 2050. So that's a very good video to watch. It's a 17-minute long TED Talk video that he's done, and it gives you a very good perspective because he's a physicist by profession, and he has been someone who's been challenging the law of physics and has worked very closely with a lot of other scientists in this area, and is considered one of the key figures as far as artificial intelligence is concerned. So I'll not be looking at playing the whole video, but this is something that would be towards the merit and distinction criteria, which I'll ask you to watch, and that would be a good video or a talk to listen into, because it will provide you a lot of perspectives in terms of how we see artificial intelligence becoming, a part and parcel of our day-to-day lives, and especially so when we talk about, digital world, and we talk about the connected world, and then in the long run we talk about things which are related to Internet of Things, everything being connected. So it'll give you a very good perspective. So let's start off with discussing a few things with regards to, before we get into the details of, artificial intelligence. The first thing that I would want to focus on would be to look at some key terminology, which is to say that, okay, what is artificial intelligence? Where do we see examples of artificial intelligence in our day-to-day life? And also from a perspective of understanding, what is it and why is it that it is catching the attention of so many people, and this is a science or a field which is to be reckoned with in the future. So in general, if you look at literally defining and looking into a few definitions of AI, what we generally get to see is that artificial intelligence is something which generally is demonstrated by machines as opposed to, natural intelligence, which is displayed by humans or animals. And if we look at a more classical definition of AI, artificial intelligence, basically it is related to a branch of computer science, and it is related to essentially developing smart programming, which allows us to do repetitive tasks, and in some cases allows us to get into what is called predictive algorithms and predictive tasks. So essentially, learning tasks which are done repetitively, and then being able to build the responses into a database to be able to start looking at predictability would be the focus and area of what artificial intelligence falls into. It is a broad science which is a part and parcel of the computer science related field, but because it has evolved over the years into a number of different types, and there are lots of different types of definitions that we normally look at. Obviously it is difficult to bring across them onto a single slide or say this is the right definition, or this is what is artificial intelligence. Now, it could also be that there are different definitions which basically can be used to say that it is basically intelligent machines. It is specific applications which allow us to develop expert systems, or in some cases, when we talk about, say, its core applications, where do we get to see? So speech recognition. So that if you use Windows today, if you use a Mac, if you use lots of various types of devices, you have Cortana, which is an equivalent of Siri, or a equivalent to, say, a Google speaker, and you have these speech recognition softwares now which basically are able to listen into you, and the more you talk to them, the more voice file and data they are able to collate, and basically they become more and more essentially more and more intelligent, and that allows them to be able to look at predicting things in this side, that they are able to essentially understand you better. When I speak to the computer, if I use what you generally get to see is that, the more I speak, the more speech file it develops, and this then allows, great amount of accuracy to be recognized when I'm speaking. And that is one application of, AI. When we look at speech recognition, language processing, you look at a simple application that you generally get to see when you go to Google and you see a Google Translator as an app, and that translates French to English, it translates French to Spanish, or English to Chinese, and that is all done using machine language and has some part of artificial intelligence into it. So from my point of view, when I look at wide-ranging definitions of, artificial intelligence, I would put it this way, that this is a field which basically combines computer science and robust, data sets, and in terms of algorithmic programming to be able to help, solve problems. And that is the field where you generally get to see, artificial intelligence being employed. Now, there are various types over the, as I'm going to go into a bit of history also in the subsequent tasks, but what we generally get to see is, this process was initially introduced by Alan Turing, who's called the father of modern computing. And in the early 1950s, when he was building, machines, he basically came up with this idea that at some stage, there will be machines which will have some intelligence in them, and that would make them intelligent in the sense that they'll be able to do some of these repetitive tasks by learning from what they are doing. And he started the concept, and the initial ball rolling in the sense that he started to work on things like machine learning and deep learning, which basically is what we see as the core foundation of what, is artificial intelligence is based on. And when we say it is a branch of computer science, what we mean by that is, Alan Turing's paper in the 1950s, which was basically computer machinery and intelligence, actually introduced the concept, and he established the fundamental goal and vision for artificial intelligence that we see today in our day-to-day life. So what we see in terms of, how it is shaped up has basically happened, and in the beginnings of it can be seen essentially from the 1950s. Now, there are lots of different, approaches which have been adopted over the years, and we'll get into a bit of it, but basically what that has done is it has enabled 4 different types of artificial intelligence that we get to see today. And these 4 different types typically tend to be, the ones which I've listed on the slide, which is reactive machines, limited memory, theory of mind, and self-awareness. Now, this bit that we get to see in terms of understanding the different types of AI in terms of what we talk, is an area that we will get into specifically, and what I don't want to do is at this stage, look at just the basic terminology. Now, the other bit that we talk about is where will you essentially find examples of artificial intelligence? So when I look at the Alexa or the speaker at home from Amazon, or any other form of smart assistants which are able to, you're able to speak to them and they respond back to you, they have some sort of artificial intelligence in them. When we look at driverless cars today, or self-driving cars, which are currently being tested in the US by major, automobile manufacturers across the globe, they will have artificial intelligence. When you look at, the use of robotics, when I say in some cases, when I look at going to CIA, when I go to CTIA, say for example, you go to Mobile World Congress, today, nowadays, some basic part of greetings and some basic functions of it can be done by robotics, and Japan is leading that way, wherein they're designing robots with human face. And, for the Olympics, if you see, they had created what are called Robo Advisors. So they are basically a shape of a robot, but they are able to answer a few questions, or, using facial recognition, detect, and then depending on the questions that you're asked, they're able to give you some answers. We see conversational bots, which are on websites nowadays. You see a chatbot, a number of questions you get asked initially before it is assigned. That chat is assigned to a human or a person in general, and you would generally see those being an example of artificial intelligence. So if I ask you a question, what's your name, first name, last name, mobile number, and if you don't write anything and says the chatbot can actually determine that, okay, I didn't get that. Could you retype your phone number or a valid phone number? And this is where you see the use of artificial intelligence or predictive algorithms being used via programming to make use of AI in terms of gathering information. You look at recommendations that you get from Amazon, Netflix. If you browse a few items over the Amazon store, the next day in the morning, you see there's an email which comes in as a newsletter, and it starts to give you, options or various options which you would get to see, that you were browsing. So this is an example of predictive and intelligent algorithms which are being used currently, and they are all under the term of what is called artificial intelligence. So at this stage, when we start learning outcome 2, it's important for us to understand what is AI, what are the types of AI, and we should be able to give a few examples to understand that these are the core areas that we do get to see where artificial intelligence is used. Now, if we get into traditional, definitions, when we talk about AI consists of all these. There are neuro-linguistic programming, there is robotic, autonomous vehicles, you look at vision, machine learning, which is the core of computer science. And as I mentioned earlier, Dr. Alan Turing, who's termed as the modern father of computing, he basically in the 50s said that, artificial intelligence is nothing but, it's advancements which will be advancements in machine learning, and essentially deep learning will be driving, the use of AI in the future. And obviously that has come out to be very true. So if we look at various ways to be able to define, artificial intelligence, what it does is it basically is applied to, say, machine learning and deep learning, and because of which it is able to, give answers or help solve problems. And that would be, what we will term as, AI. Now, when I talked about the 4 different types, of AI, what I mean is that, when we talk about 4 different types of AI, we are looking at reactive, limited memory, theory of mind, and self-aware. So in some cases, because the artificial intelligence as a field is also evolving, there are various applications through which are being developed with the core engine of AI or artificial intelligence in the background. And because of the kind of benefits and application and usages it provides, you would see that they've been classified into 4 types. So when I talk about reactive AI, it would mean that it is good, for simple classification, recognition of certain patterns. So when I say reactive AI, the simple example of this would be, the keypad. If you have a mobile phone and you use a pattern to unlock your phone, is an example of reactive AI. So if you bring the phone in front of your face, and obviously you're wearing a face mask or wearing sunglasses, and if it's not able to recognize your face, what it does is basically brings across a passcode. Now, these are examples of reactive AI. When I look at limited memory, what we are basically meaning is that in some cases, they have a database in the background, and with limited memory or capabilities of memorizing, it is able to give out answers or answers to predefined questions which can be asked, and in those cases it will be called limited memory. So it can handle complex situations to a certain extent, and requires the use of historical calculations or data calculations and predictions which have been done to be fed into a database. And if you ask a question, say for example, if you ask your intelligent speaker or the voice assistant, what's the weather like, or hey Siri, could you tell me the distance from Manchester to London, they would be able to answer some of these questions because they've been programmed into it. And historically, you would see that a lot of programming is continuously happening in order to better and improve them in terms of their functionality. So with the increase in memory and the number of transactions and kinds of questions and historical data it can share or store, it will be termed as what is called limited memory. When we talk about theory of mind, what we are able to do here is that as we are able to adapt, to situations, when we look at humans in particular, we are able to adapt to a number of situations, and depending on the situation, we can quickly, in some cases, if, for example, if you're driving a car and you see somebody crossing the road, or for example, there's an accident in front of you, your brain function is immediately able to react, and you bring the car to a halt. Now, this is because as humans, we are able to basically understand, comprehend, and then act on situations that we see in and around us in terms of our environment. And this is predominantly based on experience. So when we talk about theory of mind, it is primarily going to be artificial intelligence or applications which are going to be based on the experience and a prior experience, and are able to then adapt to certain situations. They are able to learn, from certain situations, and then put that into use, would be basically the use of theory of mind in terms of artificial intelligence. So, for example, speech recognition, which I explained earlier as a function of AI, is basically theory of mind. So the more I speak, the more better my speech files become, because it starts storing my files. It understands, the nuances in terms of how I speak, what do I speak, what is the, broader sense and in the remit of what I'm speaking. And as it is able to learn from my speech files, it becomes more and more accurate in terms of predicting when I speak to the computer, and that is where speech recognition would be in this particular context of theory of mind. And then you have the most advanced, which is self-aware. So when we talk about self-aware, what we are talking about here is it is human level intelligence, which primarily AI is able to depict. And in some cases, what you will generally see is that when we see applications where essentially, let's say, artificial intelligence is able to mimic something very closely to what humans actually do, you would generally see that this will be basically termed as self-aware. So this is where the the myths are coming in, wherein a lot of people are now predicting that AI is going to overtake human intelligence. It has no emotions, and in some cases, when it becomes self-aware, it will be able to do some of these functions, automatically without the intervention required from humans. But we will discuss that in a bit more detail as we go along. But here, in order to look at classification of different types of AI, what we need to do at this stage is understand that these are the ones that you would generally see would be applicable. Now, if we go into a brief history, just to understand where it started. So, as I mentioned to you, Dr. Alan Turing, who's the father of modern computing, is credited with bringing across this to the forefront. And what we get to see is that he initiated that machine learning, deeper learning would essentially lead to the creation of what is called artificial intelligence at some stage. Now, if we look at the abridged history of artificial intelligence, what we do get to see is that there were further developments which have happened in this particular field, and what we get to see is that since 1943 and up until 1980s, and we see 2010, up until 2010, you would see there are lots of developments which have happened, which basically have led to what we get to see as the modern artificial intelligence, or the modern core of the artificial intelligence being utilized and deployed within various systems, gadgets, machinery that we get to see and use within our day-to-day lives. Now, in order to understand how artificial intelligence works, we need to be looking at going back into this particular diagram, which basically talks about artificial intelligence being a sum total of machine learning, neuristic, neural linguistic programming, robotics, and some bits of other side of deep learning and neural networks. So here, what I've done is, just from a point of view of looking at understanding and how it is working, I've compiled a few slides primarily to give you some more bit of information on what are the various areas which have contributed to making the AI actually work. So it started off with machine learning, and basically machine learning means that it teaches a machine how to make inferences and decisions based on past experience. So there are some things that you generally get to see that robots or machines within the production department, engineering department are able to do time and after again time, and do repetitive tasks, and they are able to learn from previous experiences, and this allows them to be able to let's say do those tasks successfully time after again. So in this case, automation that we see, which is happening in engineering, we see automation which is happening in certain areas, would be all down to what is called machine learning. Now, when we talk about deep learning is basically a type of machine learning technique or a language, but it teaches a machine how to process inputs through layers in order to classify and infer and predict the outcome. That means, in some cases, I don't know how many of you remember IBM's Deep Blue, which was a computer which was developed by IBM. It was it is a supercomputer. And obviously, that supercomputer, basically was able to do certain tasks by analyzing inputs through, and putting them through, basically analyzing the algorithms and the past learning it has done. And then it was able to basically look at predicting what could be the future outcome. Now, one of the things which we look at, Deep Blue was put to, was that he was put to playing chess. Now, chess as a game, as allows or has so many combinations. Basically, chess, if you play chess in the past, what you would generally see is that chess has infinite combinations, in terms of what can be done as far as the, the game is concerned. So when we look at IBM Deep Blue, essentially, which was a supercomputer developed by IBM, and they put it to test by asking the computer to play against its own self the game of chess. And when we look at the IBM, example of Deep Blue and IBM Watson Studio, which has led to the development of, which has come out of the development of IBM Deep Blue computer or Deep Blue learning, essentially, we get to see that, what it has done is that it is basically a subset of machine learning. And here the algorithms are inspired by the activities which humans would normally show or mimic. And the computer tries to do is basically mimic the same sort of things that humans would do in a similar situation like that. And what it does from that is basically learns from data. So the more data you give to the computer, the more data it can store in its memory, the more ways it can get inspired by creating algorithms and tries to act as what humans would act. Now, when this particular bit, happened, what basically IBM did, and the IBM, what I want to do is IBM computer versus, the chess champion, which was essentially Anand, when they put the test and they asked the IBM computer called IBM Deep Blue to try and beat Kasparov and Anand, the two world greatest chess champions. What we saw is that they found it extremely difficult to beat, the IBM Deep Blue, because it was built on, as a supercomputer, built on, let's say, deep learning and machine learning. So Deep Blue versus Garry Kasparov, they played a number of games, matches, I would say, and the world chess champion, and the IBM supercomputer, when they started playing these games, the computer started to learn from what moves Garry Kasparov was making. And this allowed the computer to predict what could be the subsequent moves the champion would make when he plays chess with him. So with the 6 set of matches which were played, between the two champions, what we saw is that Deep Blue initially lost, but when the subsequent matches were done, say, for example, the first match, Garry Kasparov won, second one also he won, but subsequent matches that were played between the computer and the supercomputer and the chess champion, Deep Blue started winning. And this was primarily because of deep learning, which it was able to do, which is to look at closely mimicking human, side of things by understanding how the predictive how the champion would actually look at playing predictably on the chessboard. So it was able to do so many calculations to come across with those predictive moves that it was successfully able to then defeat Garry Kasparov in 1997. When both of them were put together. So that was a combination of machine learning and deep learning. Now, when we talk about neural networks basically work very similar to what the human neural cells are in the brain. And they, are developed using a series of algorithms which capture relationship between certain variables and processes, which basically do the data processing just like the human brain does. Now, neural networks, if we have to look at an example of neural networks, one of the key examples of neural networks would be when we look at, the application development languages like Python today, which are used for, making the applications on smartphones. So when we talk about neural networks, what we mean by that is so let's look at where are they used first. Now, they are used primarily as a part of a computing system which is designed primarily to stimulate human brain analysis and how it processes information. Now, in some artificial intelligence systems, AI-based systems, they form the core foundation because they have the capability to be able to solve problems and be able to do infinite number of possible combinations or statistical calculations to be able to predict, what would be the outcome. Now, when we talk about, say, for example, if we have to look at examples of where they are used, in generally when we look at statistics in particular. So if you have, say, 10 years of flight data or 10 years of data, say, for London Tube, and you want to look at doing some prediction to see how many times or what is the accuracy with which the London Tube actually runs. So when we talk about statistics and we talk about forecasting and we talk about predicting, you would generally see that neural networks would be useful because they are used to do time-based series prediction. They are used primarily to analyze the data which has been gathered in the past and then use that data to basically look at making predictions for the future. This is something which we get to see in one of the modelings which was done in COVID-19. So when a lot of, let's say, organizations went into doing a bit of prediction to understand what could be the number of people which will be affected or number of deaths which will happen in the UK because of COVID-19, they predicted using neural networks because they collected previous data or the data which was being fed. And as you see more data was available, the predictions in terms of, the first wave, the second wave, and the third wave, and the number of people, hospitalization, things happening, was possible. So when we look at examples of neural networks, in terms of in artificial intelligence, we generally get to see that these are going to be, looking at making predictive related work, which could be used in activities where predictions have to be done in order to look at how, say, for example, I think one of the key examples that I would give you here, and everybody could be relating to that, would be when we look at the use of a lot of statistics and analyze it from past and then look at using it for doing predictions in the future. In those kind of functions, you would see normally, neural networks as a type of, or a key part of artificial intelligence being used, in order to come up with, let's say, predictions which are very closely going to mimic the human brain. So here, a simple example would be a number of inputs which are required and what would be the output of that would be used to calculate using neural networks. Then we look at NLP, natural language processing. Now, this is something that we get to see in terms of, which is a science of reading, understanding and interpreting language. And you get to see that in basically language translators. So when we see a Google Translator, it is using what is called NLP to be able to, convert one language to the other. And this in some cases, when we have to feed instructions to the machine to be able to produce certain types of output, you look at a 3D printer, for example, that would use something in this particular context of NLP, because you pass the instructions in a particular language, and then that is interpreted by the machine in a in binary format, zeros and ones, and then it is able to print out that particular article. So an example of that would be used in application wherein you are trying to give information across to machines using NLP or natural processing language. Then we talk about computer vision and cognitive computing. So computer vision algorithms, they try to basically understand image by breaking it down into image and then into binary zeros and ones that they understand. Now Google is basically looking at coming out with algorithms wherein it is trying to improve its search. So one of the ways that it is trying to improve its search is basically it is trying to look at making it possible for you to search vis-a-vis images, not just text or string of text. Now this is being done on the basis of machine language, machine learning, and obviously a set of algorithms which are able to recognize images. So if you do a Google search now and you want to look at doing a Google search, essentially using an image, you will be able to, let's say, do that by basically taking a picture and then uploading it to your browser. And what you would generally see is that this will be related to what is called computer vision. So if I show it to you on the browser, if you have to do Google search using image, what you have to do is take a picture of that with your camera and then search for that picture. You want to search where that picture, pattern, cloth, design, or whatever it is being sold. What you can do is you can open the Chrome browser, go to the website and look at the picture you want, right click on the picture and then click search on it. And this would then allow Google to search basis the picture. And this is using, the computer vision. Now, when we talk about cognitive learning, what we generally mean by, the word cognitive, if you look at the literal meaning of the word cognitive, it means in relation to, understanding and reading. So in simple terms, when I look at defining cognitive, what it means is it's a set of mental actions or processes that you are, undertaking to be able to acquire knowledge. And that knowledge that you are acquiring is primarily helping you build your understanding through thought, experience, and your senses. So when we look at cognitive learning, what we do get to see in some places is that there are applications in which you would see, so there are robotics, for example. I'll give you an example of robotics. And we see different types of robots. If you look at the car manufacturing industry, you see an industrial robot. But when you look at human applications of that, you would generally see robots are today able to handle ball, eggs, or shake a hand with you. And that is all because they're able to learn by mimicking the human brain and understanding emotions, experiences. So they have facial recognition. They're able to hear you in terms of your voice. And seeing allows the cameras integrated into the computing and robotic side of things allow them to see. So they are visually able to see. They are able to hear you, and then they are analyzing that in terms of text, speech, and images to be able to then give you the best possible answer or a desired output. And in those cases, what they do is basically they're trying to very clearly and closely mimic human functions, and that is where you see cognitive computing coming in. So when we look at artificial intelligence, it is a combination of these 6-7 things. So we talk about machine learning, deep learning, neural networks, NLP, natural language processing, computer vision, and cognitive computing. These all come together to create what is called artificial intelligence. So this would help us cover 2.1, to understand what is artificial intelligence, definition, the types, what is the history, and how it is working, and what are the usages that we see have evolved it to a state what we get to use in today's application or in some of the devices or gadgets that we are using. Now, in the second criteria, it basically talks about explaining how artificial intelligence is being used. Now we've understood what is AI. So sometimes when I say AI is deep learning, sometimes I say AI is machine learning, sometimes I say AI is, essentially say NLP, natural language processing. But how are we all using AI? Now we are using parts and bits and pieces of these put together in some shape or form. But if I have to, classically justify that, where do I see the use of AI? Where do I use it? Now, in some cases, simple applications of that would be something that we've realized on a day-to-day basis is if you use satellite navigation on your smartphone and you're going from, say, Manchester to Cheshire, or you're going from A location to B location, and in between you see there's a lot of congestion, there's an accident which has happened, what the satellite navigation or the Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever it you're using as a device is able to do is they are able to calculate and give you a predictive route which will be a small, which will take lesser time for you to reach that destination. So when they look at giving you alternative routes to avoid that traffic jam or that pile up which has happened on the motorway or whichever way in terms of congestion, those would be examples of the use of artificial intelligence. So we see use of AI currently in pretty much all the sectors, but some of the key applications that we get to see and we don't realize that it is actually being powered in the background by AI would be things like Google Maps. You're looking at face detection, recognition, facial recognition. You look at Autobots, you look at Chatbots, for example. You look at e-payment systems. So sometimes when we look at calling the bank, and the bank, runs you through a number of options in terms of voice. Press 1 for this, press 2 for that, and then if the moment you choose option 2, it takes you and gives you further options. Then you choose further option, then it gives you another option. At some stage, if you're if the work goes deeper, then obviously at some stage you end up speaking to a customer service executive. But to a certain extent, this function in terms of if you choose this, it gives you this option. If you choose that, it transfers you there. Or if you choose this, it gives out that information. Actually is all dependent on and working through the AI engine. Now, there are lots of usages of artificial intelligence, and what we want to be able to do is, when we talk about its usages, I want to play a very small video which basically would show and explain to us, what is artificial intelligence and where all do we see it being used. So let's listen into this particular video, which will be, obviously helping us to understand where all do we use AI without realizing that this is something that we are already doing. So a short video just to look at understanding where all do we use AI at this stage.
Replace humans? Sometimes, yes. Siri, Alexa, Cortana, and Google Assistant. These are all forms of AI or artificial intelligence, but AI extends far past voice-activated assistants. AI is the simulation of human intelligence processes by machines, especially computer systems, and almost all businesses today employ some type of AI, some more complicated than others. AI can be categorized as weak or strong. Weak AI is a system designed and trained for a particular task, like voice-activated assistance. It can maybe answer your question or obey a programmed command, but can't work without human interaction. Strong AI is an AI system with generalized human cognitive abilities, meaning it can solve tasks and find solutions without human intervention. A self-driving car is an example of strong AI that uses a combination of computer vision, image recognition, and deep learning to pilot a vehicle while staying in a given lane and avoiding unexpected obstacles like pedestrians. AI has made its way into a variety of industries that benefit both businesses and consumers, like healthcare, education, finance, law, and manufacturing. In fact, many technologies incorporate AI, including automation, machine learning, machine vision, natural language processing, and robotics. The application of AI raises legal, ethical, and security concerns. For instance, if an autonomous vehicle is in an accident, liability is unclear, and hackers are using sophisticated machine learning tools to gain access to sensitive systems. Despite the risks, there's very few regulations governing the use of AI tools, but experts assure that AI will simply improve products and services and won't replace us humans anytime soon.
So as you can see, when we talk about the use of AI, use of AI can be done in a lot of different sectors, as far as the applications are concerned. Now, some of them that we get to see more than others is what I've, kind of captured in a few slides here, and that video has given you some insight. So when we talk about use of, AI, we can see that currently being done in various sectors like healthcare, education, finance, law, manufacturing, production, engineering, and depending on how do we classify it, one of the other classifications of AI is weak AI or strong AI, and obviously depending on the capabilities that it can bring to your business or to that particular sector, we will class that on the basis of the technologies that it is using. So for example, in some cases, if we talk about it is using computer vision, or if it is using cognitive computing, it will be strong AI because it is very closely trying to mimic human functions. And in this case, what you get to see is that it is learning and having a lot of memory, which means it can do predictive, forecasting, and that becomes strong AI. When we talk about, machine learning, certain types of things the machines are able to do, and in those cases, what is being fed into them as a program is what they categorize would be generally termed as, weak AI. Now, in subsequent slides, what I've done is with a few bullet points, I've tried to explain the major usages of AI and where do we see it being used. So when we talk about healthcare, we see AI being used in healthcare because if you've heard about IBM Watson, which is a supercomputer which IBM has built, and that supercomputer basically has the ability to be able to diagnose certain types of problems, give you prognosis of certain types of, let's say it's basically a database, and what it does is essentially allows you to look into and predict, say for example, certain pick out certain signs, and then obviously able to give you answers to certain questions which you would normally ask a doctor. So in some cases, when we look at Watson, IBM Watson, what is it? It's basically a question answering computer system, in short. And that is one of the advancements which has been done by IBM, and what it is helping in the sector healthcare is that it is basically allowing a lot of questions to be answered by the computer, in some cases when they are raised to, for example, the computer itself. So it is able to predict certain outcomes. It is able to basically give complex information, and it is allowing people to be able to get patient data or data related to their own records after some basic verifications are met. And that is where you see the use of, one such area in which it is being used. Now, when we talk about business, machine language algorithms or learning algorithms are essentially being used. And if you see the use of, if you've used a CRM software, a customer relationship management software like Salesforce, HubSpot, Zoho CRM, you would generally see that these softwares, are platforms which are using artificial intelligence to be able to uncover information. So when you type in the name of the company, it is able to search all the information which is in the public domain and then bring that across onto a dashboard organized as information on marketing, finance, and things like that. And that is being done using machine language. And that is one of the clear areas through which you see artificial intelligence being used for businesses. Chatbots, most websites today have what are called chatbots. They are having what are called predictive answer or answer-based systems. To a certain extent, they are able to handle your queries, and beyond a certain point, what happens is that query gets passed on to a human. And a typical example of, a chatbot would be if you go on to a particular site, you would generally see a chat window coming up. And that would mean that if you, say, for example, visited the site, which is one of the sites like in IFA, which is Institute of Financial Accountants, if you go on to this particular site and you are on any of the site's pages, what you would generally see is there's a small chatbot which appears. And when you see a chatbot appearing, at some stage what will happen is this will get assigned, and what will happen is you will start getting a nod which will say, how may I help you, or what are the basic bits that you want to do, and it will give you some answers to a certain extent. Now, when we talk about use of AI, we see use of AI in education, and it is primarily being used in certain types of systems. You look at the Blackboard, which is used in universities. You look at Moodle. You look at lots of different types of smart boards, and some parts of this would have basically AI being used. One of the clearest examples that I would give you is when you look at the use of Turnitin software, which is primarily used for detecting similarity and plagiarism. You would generally see that the Rubik's Cube structure, which also does a bit of marking to see if the essay has, met that criteria or not. And that allows, called automatic grading, which basically gives teachers, tutors, lecturers a lot of time at hand to be able to not go through lengthy assignments, and basic part of the grading can be done through that particular software. So that is use of, Gradescope and Turnitin primarily in this field of education. We look at, AI being used in finance, lots of different applications. When we look at, software applications, which primarily store data, retrieve data, reporting is integrated, creates dashboards and things like that. All that data and data side of programming, can be handled through some bit of artificial intelligence, and that is being used within finance as well. Now, there are some very good, interesting articles to read, which will basically give you more examples of where to find and, where do you see the usage of artificial intelligence happening in our day-to-day lives. One of them is on Wikipedia, because they've done it sector-wise. I think it's a good read. And the other one is basically done by TechTarget, from which I showed you a video earlier as well. And they have defined and given detailed usages of artificial intelligence that we get to see in our day-to-day lives. Now, the next assessment criteria talks about, describing how artificial intelligence has benefited society. So here, what we need to be able to do is basically talk about, after understanding what is AI and the usages of AI, we want to now talk about benefits. How do you see the benefits of this happening to the larger society? So here you might need to take up an example of, say, IBM Watson, which is the, computer essentially, which allows, it's like a question answering computer, which basically is used in healthcare nowadays quite a lot. And it allows organizations to predict future outcomes, automate some complex processes. It optimizes, timetabling, employee usage time, things like that. So there are lots of usages of IBM Watson, and how this is benefiting societies, that it is helping save costs essentially by running some of the things which are going to be repetitive. And that is one of the benefits. So obviously IBM Watson, if you talk about it in the healthcare context, it will be useful to the society because it is helping in monitoring certain key functions of clients or patients essentially at hospital. It is helping in diagnostic capabilities, which basically would look at, for example, detecting, like, let's say, example, dementia. Now, there are a lot of, obviously, lots of research is being done in order to study dementia, but the use of, machines in particular to scan where the degenerative activity is happening in brain, and, obviously how patients and how long would it take for it to set in, how long, it takes for dementia to take hold, and, what are the functions it would lead to in terms of impairment, can all be done using the monitoring and diagnostic capabilities using the artificial intelligence. So here, what you would have to do is essentially look at picking up a particular sector and then talking about, how it has helped benefit the society. One of the things that we get to see, we talk about intelligent motorways. I don't know how many of you have been on the M60 in the last few months, but you see that the motorway between Birmingham to Manchester is being now converted into what is called the smart motorway. And smart motorways would essentially allow the control room to control traffic congestion, to open the hard shoulder in certain circumstances if there's an accident or a pileup or if there is a traffic jam. So that would allow the use of, hard shoulders or other ways through which congestion could be eased. Now, when we look at this as an application in terms of benefits to the society, what is the benefit? It is reducing carbon footprint. It is reducing emissions, carbon emissions or fuel emissions. It is making journeys more viable and more efficient. and then it allows, obviously more productivity to happen, because this will make the commute less stressful for humans. And this, in a way, is the major point, is that it is basically helping to save time rather than people being stuck up in congested traffic. And that could be one of the things that you explain in terms of how it is benefiting society. So when we talk about say easing of traffic congestions on motorways, the installation of smart cameras, equipment which detects and beams information back to the control center, look at signboards which basically are able to send information from the control room to basically commuters who are driving on the road, allows this particular system to be monitored. And in those cases, you would see that this is benefiting the society. We'd also talk about this. Another application that you could talk about is facial recognition. Now, the installation of security cameras and, in places where recognition is important and, facial recognition is important, is allowing, companies, governments, and organizations to be able to reduce criminal activity. Now, this is again another benefit to the society, because when we talk about facial recognition and fingerprint technology, which wasn't in existence in the last 2 decades, we see that being used increasingly more, because it makes or it deters criminals from essentially, getting into information or getting access to information through banks or financial data, and that deters fraud. And that would be one of the key effects of, looking at benefits to society. Now, one of the things that I would say, watching this particular short video would also give you a good idea in terms of how the artificial intelligence is actually benefiting our society. This is a slight longish video, which is about 8 minutes, and what Bernard Marr essentially has done, he has basically provided a very good outlook in terms of what are the positives and negatives or ways in which our society is changing for the good. And this is primarily happening because of the benefits of the artificial intelligence. So let's listen into a few minutes of it rather than go through the full video, which would be something I would recommend that you do at a later stage after this presentation.
Impact of artificial intelligence on society. In my book, The Intelligence Revolution, I talk about how AI is transforming our world. And I believe that artificial intelligence is the most powerful and the most transformative technology that humans have ever had access to. So in this video, I want to look at some of the key impacts. Jobs will change and be transformed. There was an interesting study by PricewaterhouseCoopers that looked at the UK, and it said that AI could potentially replace about 7 million jobs in the UK alone. What was interesting is that it could also create about 7.2 million new jobs. So this for me is an interesting dilemma of AI, that we will definitely see people losing their jobs become redundant and being transformed by AI, but we also see huge new opportunities. So what we need to do as individuals is we need to think about what this technology can now do and what will this mean for our job. Not necessarily the job that we do at the moment, but how might our job change in the future, and what roles that we currently do, AIs can do in the future, and what we will carry on as humans where we can add some real value. Automation. This obviously is linked to jobs too, but it's about business processes and processes in society. We are now able to have self-driving cars. We have robots that move by themselves. We have ships that autonomously cross oceans. We have self-flying, autonomous passenger drones. So increasingly we see more and more of our processes being automated by smart, intelligent machines that use AI. But it's not just physical labor, it's also white-collar automation that is being fast-tracked at the moment, where we are re-envisaging jobs, even like lawyers and medics and others, to think, hey, we can now automate a lot of this. I've recently designed the data strategy for Shell, for example, and a big chunk of this was actually the legal department and how they can now use artificial intelligence to automatically write and review legal contracts. Better healthcare. We are currently facing a healthcare crisis across the world, and artificial intelligence can make healthcare better, more efficient, but also give more people access to healthcare. A study by McKinsey found that we can save around $100 billion a year in healthcare by using artificial intelligence and machine learning. And if you just think about this, we now have apps and we can build intelligence into them. So if we have certain skin conditions, we can use our phone, we can take a picture, it can then tell us what skin conditions we might have. And the diagnosis is not done by a human, but by an artificial intelligence algorithm. So all of this will give more people access, potentially free access to healthcare, and free up current healthcare workers to do the really important value-adding jobs that we all care about. AI will transform education. Our education system is really out of date today because it was designed 50, 100 years ago where we basically delivered a mass education to prepare people for certain jobs that they would then have for their lifetime. Nowadays, schools need to be reimagined, and artificial intelligence can do this. It can really track progress of individual kids. So if they're using education apps, let's say they're using a math app, for example, it can track exactly where you're having problems, and then they can build on this and give you more active exercises. This is something that a teacher that has 20 or 30 kids in their class simply can't do. So we need to reimagine how we do this. And very similar to healthcare, what artificial intelligence enables us to do is to give more people access to education and potentially make it free for many more people and make it personalized. Better information.
So as you can see, obviously there are lots of benefits to this society, and he's recapping some of the benefits because he's an author who's written a number of books on what are the benefits of artificial intelligence to humans and society in general. And I would suggest that, that would be a good read. And, when I look at his blog that I put in as additional read towards the references, gives you a good snapshot in terms of the benefits in general that he's summarizing here on that video. Now, the next one that we want to look at is explain the concerns people have in relation to artificial intelligence. Now, there are lots of concerns, obviously, of AI, and what we do get to see is that there are fair few arguments on both sides that AI is going to be devastating and AI is going to be super beneficial for humans. And obviously, there are these two contradicting thoughts which need to be actually discussed in relation to what concerns people have in relation to AI. Now, what we want to be able to do is basically look at this particular chart, which talks about some of the myths that we get to read or see about AI, that, super intelligence or machines would become super intelligent by 21st century, 2100, and this would make it impossible, for humans to be able to do anything. So machines will take over. But obviously the fact is that AI is dictated by, the access to data and access to, learning which needs to happen through humans. So obviously, one of the things that we will not get to see is that, yes, AI will evolve. It will become super intelligent, but it will not be in a position to overtake humans. Then we talk about, some of the other bits that AI would turn evil. That means we have seen certain movies in the past like Terminator. We've seen, certain Hollywood creations which basically talk about, and show the phenomenon of AI, essentially, specifically in the Terminator series of movies, that, AI can turn evil. That means it can start to take decisions, and that would mean that, it can go against humans. So again, that is a myth, and it needs, there are no concerns around that. Then we look at that one of the concerns which Bernard Marr has also raised in his video is that number of jobs will be lost. Obviously, a lot of robotics and automation is happening within some of the industries. If you see Amazon warehouses, for example, you see Waitrose warehouses or stocking facilities, you would generally see that a lot of this has been replaced by automatic robots, which are basically doing the functions. Yes, it is going to look at, obviously doing away with repetitive jobs where humans would not be ideally more productive, and their robots are going to be more productive. So there are industries which are going to employ more automation, and that would mean that, yes, in some sectors, job would be lost. But on the other hand, what he also said is that the McKinsey studies predicted that there will also be a lot of creation of jobs in this area, and that would be higher level jobs which will be created. So again, this is something which is inconclusive, it remains to be seen whether it'll create jobs or it'll take away jobs. But at this moment, it looks like it's a balanced argument, and there is not a need for concern. Obviously, some of these jobs will become more developed jobs which humans would do, and then at some stage, some of the repetitive jobs which basically involve transactions or operational related things could be taken up by robotics. So there are lots of these myths essentially that we have and we get to see, which are related to AI. And in this particular section of the task, what we need to be able to do is predominantly talk about some of the concern areas that AI has, and you could take up some of these and then explain that in order to cover this criteria. Now the next one talks about how do we look at explaining artificial intelligence and its use in future. Now this one is, I would say, closely related to the bit that we have seen in terms of the usage of AI in the future. One of the things that you see on the slide is Sundar Pichai, who's the chief executive of Google. And Google has been at the forefront of using predictive algorithms which are all based on artificial intelligence, and they are helping better some of the services which it provides in search, in particular the image search that they're introducing, the voice related recognition search they're introducing, and last but not the least, when we look at some of the Google products that we are not aware of, things like Google Scholar, Google Books, you look at Google Maps, all these involve the use of artificial intelligence, and more of this is going to be seen as we go across into the future. So we talked about briefly in terms of how AI is being used in different sectors. This task is to pick up one particular sector and then explain that in a bit more detail in terms of how this will shape up. So if I take up transportation, and I looked at an example of reducing congestion, which was one of the benefits of AI, but if I look into the crystal ball and peep into the future in terms of how this will benefit transportation, what we see is a bit of a transformation happening through driverless cars, smart motorways. And that is where you are going to see the future of artificial intelligence helping to improve transportation. So driverless cars would be such an area where you could use this as a sector, transportation as a sector, to be able to explain the use of artificial intelligence in the future. Similarly, it could be done for manufacturing, healthcare, it could be done for education, it could be done for media. An example of media that I will talk about is, I know that when we have these set-top boxes, whether it's Netflix, Amazon service, or you have Sky, whatever you have at home, there is a lot of predictive advertising which tends to happen depending on the programming that you're watching on your TV set. Now, what this is helping how has it become possible is that artificial intelligence is being used in the background to serve up content or suggest you content that you need to watch basis your previous watching hours, or the previous media or sections that you watch or programs that you watch. And that is where you would be able to explain that in the future predictive algorithms would be used, or artificial intelligence essentially will be used to suggest the similar type of articles that you read or programs that you watch, or serials that you watch, and that is going to be done using that will be one of the benefits that you will see in media. Now, There are lots of benefits of artificial intelligence in the future, and my suggestion would be to read some of these articles, which is written in the Forbes, and there are a few which have got published in the last few years. So the first one would be, it talks about the AI-enabled future. How will AI impact the future of our work and life? And then 5 ways AI will change the world by 2050. And that would be looking into the future of AI and the benefits of AI in the future. And this will give you some additional information with regards to this particular task. Now, very briefly addressing the merit and the distinction criteria, the merit one talks about how do we overcome some of the concerns relating to AI. So here we've discussed the myths and the concerns in the task 2.4. What you have to do is basically extrapolate that and expand that and pick up any one of these areas, like, when we talk about privacy, we talk about data protection, we talk about, for example, human rights, and how this would, be tackled when we look at artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence, there are lots of problems with it as well, and there are problems that need to be overcome, and they are predominantly related to, data concerns, privacy concerns. They are related to, for example, in some cases, and I give you an example of Cambridge Analytica. So we talk about this because in some cases, if programs and algorithms are allowed to run without checks, you would generally see that they will, be infringing human rights and, privacy concerns in terms of data being collected on the sites or by various applications. So in some cases, that has to be explained by just taking up one as an example, because it talks about explain. You don't need to cover all these, but just one, and that would do this particular task and criteria. Now, the last one, very, very briefly, is evaluate the impact of artificial intelligence in personal and business activity. So here, if you look at, when we looked at the concern of jobs, one of the things which obviously, Al Guru, which is AI guru, he's considered as the guru of artificial intelligence, Kai-Fu Lee, because he's championed some part of the AI technology. He basically, in one of the lectures, basically predicted that the 90% of the jobs that we see, the bottom 90% that we see, would actually be taken up or eaten up by AI or automation, essentially. The bottom 50% of the income that we get to see in the world will essentially be displaced because of the fact that routine jobs will disappear, and more routine jobs will need to be created, which are going to be based more on qualitative and quantitative aspects of working, which is where the new jobs are going to get created, which are going to be taken up by automation. Now, one of the things that he does predict is that means that if you look at people at the bottom of the society, wherein they do basic jobs, those jobs are going to disappear and are going to go into automation. If you come to the middle segment, you would see 50% of the people, or a certain percentage of people who work within the middle segment and are in jobs. In those cases, you would also see a bit of displacement, and some of those jobs will also be taken up by automation. And the top currently that you see, people who have the top percentage in terms of jobs, that is where you will also see automation and artificial intelligence coming in. So there is a displacement of jobs which are going to happen at all the level, at the top level, at the mid level, at the lower tier level. But in order to create new jobs, essentially, which will be replaced by automation, artificial intelligence will also look at creating these jobs. And these jobs would be more in terms of, say, cybersecurity. You're looking at intelligence side of things, programming, coding, those kind of fields, nanorobotics, which is coming up, or, for example, the study of neural networks, which is coming up, the integration of artificial intelligence into the healthcare sector in particular, which is coming up. You look at driverless cars as a sector. You look at space exploration as a sector. So some of these jobs which are getting created are highly specialized jobs, but are being created, and they are going to be beneficial for both business and the society. So if you look at an example of what I gave earlier, when you look at the Amazon warehouse, one of the warehouses that it has more than 100,000 robots, and they are involved primarily in the picking and packaging function. Now, this function is still being performed by humans in certain warehouses that Amazon has, which are smaller facilities. But if you look at bigger facilities, these functions have now been taken over in terms of automation by robots. Now, where will the functions, where will these additional jobs be created for humans? They would essentially be created in designing facilities, or in basically, looking at creating systems which are going to be deployed for increasing automation in certain sectors. So people involved in behind the scenes in terms of creating some of these technologies will lead to the creation of more jobs, and that is where it will benefit the business as well as the society. Now, a simple example of this that I get to see in this slide is that over the years, when you see car manufacturing happening, that has involved the use of robotics has increased over the years. So initially they were being used primarily in the welding and soldering department. Now they are being used in the paint department, some of the other facilities within the car manufacturing department, wherein robots have actually taken the human function. But that also means that in some cases, some of these repetitive jobs are being replaced because for humans, these jobs were not very productive and efficient. And because they were focused only on a single task, that meant that most of these companies in the 80s and 90s had a lot of staff turnover. And that has been actually done away with because of the fact that, some of these jobs have now been taken over by, robotics. So there are benefits of it, and that is what we need to do in terms of evaluation, is to talk about the benefits and the disbenefits, or advantages and disadvantages, or pros and cons, whichever way you call it. And that has to be put forward as a perspective in terms of, how artificial intelligence will essentially benefit personal as well as business activity. Privacy and human rights side of things could be looked at. When you look at some of these intelligent speakers that we have at home, the Amazon Alexa or the Google, speaker, or the Apple speaker, you generally see that they are also having, they can also eavesdrop on your information because the mics are active, and when you are conversing, some of the data is being without your knowledge, is being transmitted back to their servers, which is basically informing them of the activities, and that could be, one of the areas wherein eavesdropping is happening. And this is one such negative side of AI, which we get to see is currently being debated. And some people, what they do is when they're not using the speakers, what they do is they press the mute button and the mics go to mute. You see a red ring around the Amazon speaker or the Google speaker coming, and that means that it is not actively listening into the conversations that you're having in the room. So that would basically help cover, this side of things when we talk about, the benefits to business as well as, personal, society. Now, this particular TED Talk, which I was listening into earlier, How to Get Empowered and Not Overpowered by AI by Max Tegmark, is a very good talk to listen into. This is about an 18-minute session, and I would suggest that you strongly read, and listen into this particular session, because it is going to be directly related to this task, and it'll give you some perspectives of what I've covered and tried to capture in this slide. So this would nicely help us cover the learning outcome 2, which primarily is focused on understanding artificial intelligence and the usage of artificial intelligence, the benefit it brings to society and the business, and in general, what would be the future of artificial intelligence that we see, in some years and times to come. So at this stage, I would like to invite any questions